My little town, tucked away in the Japanese mountains, used to be completely desolate outside of ski season. Now it's almost unrecognizable, flooded with foreign tourists year-round. It's a common sight to see them at the local drugstore near the station, piling their shopping baskets high with cosmetics, marveling at how cheap everything is. And they're right. You can come here and experience incredible quality and superb service for a fraction of what it costs back home. On the surface, it looks like a perfect, affordable paradise. But I live here, and I see what's behind the curtain. This cheap Japan that tourists have fallen in love with wasn't built by some brilliant economic strategy. It's the direct result of a society that has, for decades, prized silent obedience over individual voices. It's built on the backs of people who work punishing overtime for stagnant wages because complaining would be seen as selfish, as disturbing the harmony. The very culture that ensures your train is perfectly on time is the same one that tells a woman she is unclean and cannot step into a sacred sumo ring. The same one that quietly ostracizes anyone who, like me, dares to point out the contradictions. So when I see those happy tourists with their shopping bags, I can't help but wonder if they ever consider the true, unspoken cost of their perfect, affordable vacation.
Wow. That's a really powerful and frankly necessary place to start. You've put your finger right on the core of this whole dilemma, haven't you? That huge systemic friction. What we're seeing is this really sophisticated, highly functional nation that presents this celebrated high-quality face to the world, a genuine tourist paradise. But at the same time, it's dealing with this structurally compromised and, well, increasingly resistant domestic reality. So our deep dive today, it's really an essential investigation into just how deep this contradiction runs. We're going to trace this fault line quite meticulously, I think, across three really critical areas. First, the booming national economy versus those stagnant local wages. Second, the sort of unspoken labor and cultural barriers holding back change. And third, maybe the most critical point, the nation's, well, frankly, alarming lag in digital capability compared to its peers globally. We'll explore how that very pursuit of harmony, which perfected the present in many ways, might actually be risking the future.
Okay, so let's unpack that first contradiction you mentioned, the huge tourism boom, because you really can't miss it. It's the most visible sign of this whole dynamic. And the main driver, well, it seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? It's the yen being so weak. It's turned the country into, like, a global bargain destination.
Exactly. That weak yen is acting like a massive economic magnet. I mean, if you look at the sheer numbers from 2024, the scale is just staggering. Japan welcomed a massive 36.9 million inbound tourists.
36.9 million.
Yes. And to give you some context, that's a 15.6% jump even compared to the record high they set back in 2019, before the pandemic. So this isn't just a recovery, it's more like a structural explosion in demand. It's fundamentally changing the economy.
And financially, that kind of volume must pump a huge amount of money onto the national balance sheet, right? Probably hiding some other underlying issues in the process.
Oh, absolutely it does. That tourism surge brought in something like US $53 billion in cash in 2024 alone. The influx was so significant that tourism actually jumped over other sectors. It became the country's second largest source of foreign exchange for the year. You can bet the government loves seeing those numbers. It's vital capital. It helps shore up the balance of payments.
And I picked up from the material that these tourists aren't just sticking to Tokyo or Kyoto either. This boom seems to be spreading out across the whole country.
Yeah, the reach is quite remarkable. Sure, the biggest chunk of visitors came from nearby South Korea, Hong Kong, Taiwan. But there were also really strong growing numbers from further away. India, for example, and English and Spanish-speaking countries. And the key point is these tourists were recorded visiting almost every prefecture.
Wow.
So yeah, it spreads the money around, which is good in one sense, but it also spreads the strain on infrastructure and that cultural friction we talked about far beyond just the main cities.
Okay, so on the national level, it looks like this incredible success story, generating loads of foreign currency. But as you and I both know, that weekend, the very thing driving this tourist success is precisely what's causing so much pain at home. It's the fundamental, almost brutal trade-off here.
It really is the trade-off defining modern life there. What makes Japan cheap and, well, perfect for the tourist, that weak yen makes life structurally harder and more expensive for residents, especially when their wages haven't really budged much. So the direct impact of the yen and this resulting tourist wave is definitely driving some profound unhappiness domestically, particularly as inflation, something Japan hasn't really contended with for decades, is finally starting to bite.
Right. People living paycheck to paycheck must be feeling that squeeze incredibly hard when basic things suddenly get expensive after years of stability.
That's exactly it. For a society that got used to decades of almost zero inflation, stable prices, this shock is really profound. Our sources highlighted one item that really brought this home for consumers: white rice.
A staple.
The absolute staple. Earlier this year, the price for a standard 5-kilogram bag shot up to 4,580 yen. If you work that out per kilogram, the price essentially doubled in a pretty short time.
Doubled for rice.
Yeah. And in a country where rice is so culturally and economically central, seeing its price double isn't just like an economic inconvenience. It creates this deep anxiety about basic survival, about purchasing power. And when staples get unaffordable, people start looking for someone to blame.
And naturally, that economic stress spills over directly into political turmoil. It seems like a really unstable political climate right now. We've seen, 4 prime ministers in just 5 years? That screams a lack of public confidence. The sources even mentioned the agriculture minister having to resign, I guess, over exactly these kinds of issues, like food prices soaring.
The political scene is definitely volatile because, the population is genuinely feeling the pinch of this paradox. And this instability creates the perfect breeding ground for political movements offering simple, often protectionist answers. We saw a really stunning example of this during the 27th House of Councilors election, a major upset.
Tell us a bit more about that upset, because challenging the established political order in Japan, that feels significant.
It was significant. The challenge came from the Sanseido Party. They're relatively new, an ultra-right populist group, maybe 5 years old or so, but they managed a huge upheaval. They jumped from holding just 2 seats to securing a shocking 14 seats.
14 from 2.
Yeah, it's a massive surge. And it's a clear signal that a pretty big chunk of Japanese society feels economically left behind, disenfranchised, and is now willing to embrace quite radical anti-establishment narratives.
So what's Sanseido's platform? What specific things are they tapping into to get that kind of traction? How are they framing this domestic pain?
Oh, it's classic pain point politics. They're plugging directly into that deep unhappiness over the economy, and also this feeling that, national identity and control are being eroded by global forces. Their rhetoric is fiercely Japan first.
No.
Their platform is built on being anti-vaccine, anti-foreign labor, anti-immigration, and really importantly, anti-globalism. The narrative is simple and effective. The nation's aging, the birth rate's collapsing, the economy's struggling, and now this wave of global tourists driven by the weak yen isn't seen as a win. It's framed as this external force crashing in, making daily life unaffordable, straining resources. Their solution: shut the door, basically. Restore stability by looking inward.
It's just the ultimate paradox, isn't it? The national economic success story, this tourism boom, is directly fueling a nationalist, anti-globalist political backlash right at home. And that really leads us perfectly into the next layer, the underlying system of labor and culture that sort of props up this whole contradiction.
Yes, and we really have to go back to your powerful opening statement here. That affordable service, the incredible quality tourists rave about it, doesn't just happen by magic. Its foundation is what we could call the unspoken labor contract, one that demands, punishing levels of overtime and accepts structurally stagnant wages. This is where that cultural cost really becomes clear.
It's the silent suffering, essentially, that pays for the perfect train schedules and the flawless service. And the social pressure to just keep quiet and maintain the system, it's immense, isn't it? Complaining about your long hours or low pay isn't just seen as, rocking the boat. It gets framed culturally as being selfish, as disrupting the all-important harmony, the wa. So you're basically expected to endure it silently for the good of the group, for the quality of service. Often, workers end up prioritizing the process, the appearance of harmony, over their own well-being.
Absolutely. And this cultural resistance to making waves, to complaining, feeds directly into a massive looming macroeconomic problem. Over the last 10 years or so, Japan has seen a consistent decrease in its labor productivity.
A decrease, not just stagnation.
A decrease. And this isn't just about efficiency on a company level. It's about the widening gap in productivity compared to other advanced economies. The output per worker just isn't keeping pace globally.
And when you factor in the demographic situation, the rapidly aging society, the incredibly low birth rate that productivity gap becomes, potentially crippling.
It's more than crippling. It makes the current labor structure economically unsustainable in the long run. With fewer and fewer young workers coming into the system, improving productivity isn't just, nice for profits. It's an absolute demographic imperative just to maintain the current standard of living. And yet, the very labor structure that produces that famous service quality is actively resistant to the kinds of efficiency gains that require modernization, automation, and especially digitalization.
So this cultural preference for social harmony, for consensus building, it doesn't just affect individual workers feeling unable to speak up. It translates directly into the corporate world, too, like a huge cultural barrier to disruptive change.
That's a really key insight. Japanese corporate culture deeply, deeply favors group harmony. It relies on extensive communication, endless meetings sometimes, seeking consensus across all levels before any big decision is made. Now, while this avoids internal conflict, which is valued, it fundamentally leads to this immense resistance against rapid disruptive changes. Think about the kind of digital transformation movements we see elsewhere, the speed of Silicon Valley or Shenzhen. That requires quick iteration, a high tolerance for risk, and crucially, the ability to accept failure as just a necessary step on the path to innovation.
Which must clash violently with a business philosophy where trust, stability, predictability, those are the absolute top priorities.
Precisely. Trust is the ultimate currency in Japanese business. And this creates an inherent, deep-seated resistance to embracing risk, to accepting failure. And therefore, resistance to the fundamentally disruptive mindset you need for real digital transformation, or DX as they call it. The very idea of tearing down a perfectly functional, even if it's inefficient legacy system for some high-risk, unproven digital model is just culturally unacceptable for many established leaders. They see the risk, not the potential reward.
Okay, so if they aren't really embracing disruptive innovation from the outside, how has Japan traditionally innovated? Because they clearly have innovated in the past.
Right. Historically, innovation has mostly been driven by the large established conglomerates, the keiretsu, and similar giants. It comes from intensive internal R&D. But, and this is the crucial point, that R&D tends to focus on low-risk, incremental improvements.
Like making the current product 0.1% better.
Exactly. Perfecting existing technologies, refining processes, maybe developing adjacent markets slightly. It's an approach that's designed to optimize what's already known and working. It's not geared towards creating a completely new, truly innovative product or service category that might actually upset the existing market order, maybe even cannibalize their own existing business lines. The whole system is sort of designed to perfect the past and the present, rather than taking these enthusiastic, perhaps messy, leaps into an uncertain future.
That distinction, optimizing the known versus creating the new, makes this next section about Japan's actual digital lag feel particularly urgent, doesn't it? Because the very thing they seem to need, the ability to move fast digitally, especially to offset those demographic issues, is the thing the culture seems to resist.
Yeah, when we look at where Japan stands in the global digital race, the statistics are not just worrying, they're frankly alarming for the world's third largest economy. Take the IMD digital competitiveness metric. As of 2021, Japan was ranked a pretty dismal number 28.
28? That seems incredibly low.
It is. And what's maybe even more concerning is that its actual index score, the underlying measure, has basically flatlined. It hasn't progressed in 5 years.
5 years of standing still while everyone else is sprinting ahead, especially regional competitors?
Exactly. That's 5 years of critical lost time. During that same period, you've got countries like China, South Korea, Hong Kong. They've been aggressively scaling their digital learning curves, closing gaps, adopting new tech. Japan is visibly falling behind. And the quantified gap, what we can call the digital scorecard, it's stark. It really paints a picture of systemic underinvestment and slow adoption.
Let's start with the talent piece you touched on earlier, because you can't have a digital economy without the people to run it.
And the talent pool is, well, microscopic. The data suggests only about 1% of the entire workforce is classified as digital talent.
Only 1%.
1%. And that shortage translates directly into really poor adoption across foundational areas, things that define modern life elsewhere. Think about basic digital habits. E-commerce penetration, business-to-consumer retail online, is just 6.76%.
Wow, that low.
Yeah, for comparison, many major economies are closer to 15%, even 20% or higher. Telemedicine, despite the aging population needing it most, sits at only 5% adoption. Mobile banking penetration, just 6.9%. These are single-digit levels in areas that are pretty much assumed foundational services in nearly all peer economies.
And it's not just the private sector lagging behind, is it? The efforts towards digital government seem equally stuck.
That's right. When you look at infrastructure, smart city rankings, the results are underwhelming. Tokyo, which you'd think would be a shining global example, ranked 84th in the IMD Smart City ranking.
84th.
84th. And the number of citizens actually using digital government apps, a tiny 7.5%. It points to a systemic lack of digital maturity, really spanning both the public and private sectors.
Okay, so the systemic lack of maturity, it must be rooted in something fundamental. We hear this term, the 2025 cliff. It sounds pretty dramatic. What exactly is that?
The 2025 cliff is the industry's quite stark term for a projected economic disaster. It's linked directly to Japan's widespread reliance on ancient legacy IT systems. A huge majority of firms, especially older, larger ones, are still operating on these decades-old, highly customized, monolithic systems. They're built in-house. They're hard to change. And the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry projects that if these systems aren't modernized or retired by 2025, the potential economic loss could be up to 12 trillion yen annually.
So 12 trillion yen a year, that's the potential cost of clinging to the past right there. And these legacy systems, they're the real structural blockage preventing the shift to modern cloud services.
Precisely. They are the lock on the door. These old systems are fundamentally incompatible with modern, flexible cloud environments. Companies find it incredibly difficult, sometimes impossible, to shift to modern cloud services, things like SaaS, software as a service, PaaS, platform as a service, or IaaS, infrastructure as a service. These cloud models are essential today for everything from remote work to data analytics to scalability. But because companies are literally locked into the past by their own bespoke, non-standard infrastructure, they just miss out on all those benefits: efficiency, agility, cost savings.
And even when companies do try to push for digital transformation or DX, it sounds like it often lacks a clear, coordinated vision.
Yes, that's a common finding. DX implementation often ends up being fragmented. It happens in isolated pockets. Maybe one department tries something, but it lacks a true company-wide strategic direction. The sources show that only a very small number of companies are actually doing advanced analytics, using things like deep learning or AI to properly process and leverage their data strategically.
Right.
And this leads to huge disparities emerging. You have a few large companies, the forerunners, trying desperately to catch up, while the vast majority of small and medium-sized enterprises, the SMEs, are just falling further and further behind.
Let's break that down a bit. How do the priorities differ between those big corporations, the ones leading the charge, and the SMEs, the later adopters?
Okay, so the large companies, the ones with generally more capital and maybe better access to scarce talent, they show significantly higher adoption rates across most advanced technologies. Their future investment plans are clearly focused on sophisticated stuff. Advanced AI, building up big data infrastructure, the Internet of Things, IoT, and high-level cybersecurity. They're looking at things like implementing the zero trust security model, that modern approach where you basically trust no user or device by default, inside or outside the network, until verified. Their adoption rate for RPA, robotic process automation, is way up at 92.5%. They're really trying to weave cutting-edge tech into how they operate.
But the smaller companies, which actually make up the vast majority of the domestic economy, they're miles behind on this advanced stuff.
Severely lagging. For SMEs, that same RPA adoption is only 20.6%. Compare that to 92.5% for large firms. Huge difference. Massive. And their main focus, their top priorities for investment right now, they're still on basic foundational digital tools. Things like electronic approval systems, digital stamping systems, literally just digitizing old paper-based back office workflows, and maybe implementing some foundational public cloud solutions like basic size. They're still trying to solve the problem of just getting basic operations digitized, while the big players are already moving on to predictive analytics and AI strategy. This maturity gap is enormous, and it acts as a major drag on overall national productivity.
Okay, let's maybe track how some specific technologies are trending, starting with the ones that got a perhaps painful but necessary boost from the COVID-19 pandemic.
Right, the pandemic definitely forced Japan's hand, finally confronting the need for proper remote work infrastructure. That necessity really accelerated adoption for certain specific solutions. We saw significant increases in things like business chat platforms, mobile device management for securing remote devices, public cloud SaaS, that cloud software we talked about, and digital signature systems. These all directly enabled telework, which importantly also pushes companies towards needing better cloud infrastructure and more secure data access underneath it all.
What about the technologies everyone talks about as the future AI and IoT? Where are they actually gaining traction if overall adoption is still pretty low?
Well, overall corporate adoption of AI sitting around 15.2% and IoT at 18%, it is still low compared to global leaders. But the trend is positive. It is progressing. Companies are starting to see clear returns here, mostly when they apply these technologies to improve productivity or cut costs. So for instance, using IoT sensors in manufacturing for predictive maintenance, fixing machines before they break, or using fairly basic AI models for better demand forecasting. Awareness is definitely high. But interestingly, the pandemic actually seemed to polarize investment here. While about 32% of companies said they implemented AI in response to COVID, almost the same amount, 27%, actually delayed their digital initiatives altogether.
Hi.
They had to divert resources just to cope with the immediate economic disruption, just to stay afloat. So pushed some forward, but held others back.
And then there are the technologies that seem to be barely making a dent at all, showing maybe the deepest resistance or lack of immediate need.
Yeah, this is the sort of untapped potential group. Low adoption currently, and also relatively low interest for future corporate investment right now. This list includes things like 5G adoption. It's extremely low, 3.8% for large corporations, and basically 0% for SMEs.
0. Wow.
Yeah. Then there's enterprise architecture, that crucial strategic blueprint for aligning IT with business goals that's only at 6.3% overall. And blockchain is barely registering at 1.7%. These areas just seem stuck in the very early stages of adoption and investment thinking for most companies.
But there is one massive exception to this general picture of digital lag, isn't there? Industrial automation. Japan is still a powerhouse in robotics.
Yes. That is the essential caveat. Japan is absolutely positioned among the world leaders here. They represented something like 47% of global robot production back in 2020. Unsurprisingly, industrial robots, the ones in factories, dominate this landscape. That's their historical strength. But we've also seen a significant recent surge in demand for service robots. Things like delivery robots, cleaning robots, customer service bots. That was definitely driven by the pandemic, by the need for non-contact solutions in hospitality, retail, healthcare, and so on. However, to maintain this competitive edge long-term, Japan absolutely has to ensure the intelligence component, the sophisticated software layer that actually powers these robots, keeps pace. Which means they need advanced AI, data mining capabilities, big data expertise, which brings us right back to that critical digital talent gap we discussed earlier. They need the brains, not just the bodies. Now, the Japanese government is thankfully acutely aware of this digital lag. They see it as an existential threat. Their big, official, ambitious response is this vision they call Society 5.0.
Society 5.0. Okay, I think most people have heard of the Information Society, maybe Society 4.0. What exactly is this super smart society supposed to be?
Right. So Society 5.0 is their national strategic blueprint. It's described as the convergence, the merging of cyberspace and the physical world. If Society 4.0 was the information society focused mainly on collecting and accessing data, Society 5.0 aims to take that data and integrate it deeply back into the physical world. The idea is to use advanced tech, AI, IoT, big data, not just for business, but to solve fundamental social problems, improve daily life, boost productivity across the board, and create this truly super smart society. It's framed as a national mission, a way to leapfrog the digital divide and tackle challenges like aging and depopulation.
Okay, it sounds ambitious, but how is the government actually trying to make this happen? Given that past efforts, maybe led by individual ministries, clearly weren't enough.
Yeah, the government definitely recognized that those decentralized, siloed efforts had failed. So the big response was establishing the digital agency, the DA, back in September 2021. This new agency was given significantly enhanced centralized power. It effectively became the overall coordinator for all digital policies. It centralized decision-making, and crucially, it centralized most of the government's IT budget, taking that control away from the individual ministries who often guarded their own turf.
That sounds like a pretty necessary, almost heavy-handed move, centralizing power to force change through the bureaucracy. What were the DA's initial main goals? What did they aim to do with that budget?
Their plan for the 2022 fiscal year was backed by a pretty substantial budget, $472 billion, which is around $3.6 billion US dollars. The priorities were quite straightforward, but massive in scale. First, standardize and unify administrative services right across the country by 2025. Get rid of all the different local systems. Second, implement a single, centralized, secure cloud platform for all government data, a huge undertaking. And third, push forward the development of smart cities, aiming for 100 active initiatives by 2025. The whole effort is really about building this robust, central digital backbone for the country, one that can support things like collaborative data sharing and next-gen infrastructure like 5G and maybe even quantum tech down the line.
Okay, so the government is trying to build the standardized digital roads and rails, so to speak. But the engine of disruptive innovation, the new software, the cool apps, the game-changing services that run on that infrastructure, that usually comes from a vibrant startup scene, doesn't it? How does Japan stack up there?
This is another critical area where that cultural preference for stability seems to hinder things. While the startup ecosystem is growing, And there are definitely exciting domestic companies emerging. Names like Smart HR or Payde come up. It remains structurally quite small, and it's certainly undercapitalized compared to other advanced economies like the US, China, or many places in Europe.
And the venture capital landscape probably reflects that same sort of risk aversion, less money flowing into unproven ideas.
It does seem to. While the total volume of VC investment did increase significantly, about fivefold between 2010 and 2019, which sounds great in isolation.
Yeah, sounds like a lot.
Right. But the overall size of the market is still tiny compared to global peers. There's a really telling metric. The intensity of unicorns, those private startups, valued over $1 billion relative to GDP. Japan has the lowest intensity among selected countries, just 0.22%.
0.22%. That's incredibly low.
It suggests the risk appetite just isn't really there domestically at the scale needed to create that rapid disruptive growth you see elsewhere.
Okay, so if you combine a corporate culture that tends to resist risky innovation internally with a domestic startup scene that isn't generating enough disruption externally, you end up with this massive technological capability gap. What's the inevitable result for actually getting modernization done?
The consequence is becoming structurally reliant on importing intelligence from outside. Because of that recognized lack of local digital talent and the shortage of disruptive domestic innovation, basically, a lack of indigenous digital firepower, Japan's large established companies are increasingly forced to look outwards. Specifically, they're looking for foreign B2B, business-to-business solutions to fill these critical technology and expertise gaps. This reliance on importing digital solutions becomes, in many cases, the primary and often the fastest way for them to modernize.
Right, so this shortage of homegrown innovation, combined with that urgent pressure to modernize, avoid that 2025 cliff, it basically creates this huge, potentially very lucrative opportunity for foreign companies, especially maybe innovative smaller firms that have specific niche digital solutions. Japan effectively becomes this underserved, high-quality market that's ready, even desperate, to pay for upgrades.
That is absolutely the key takeaway for the global digital economy looking at Japan right now. It's a lucrative market precisely because of the size of that digital gap, because of the government's clear push to upgrade legacy systems, and because everyone recognizes the shortage of domestic digital talent and specialized startups. Japan is actively, consciously scouting abroad for trusted solutions, particularly in areas like cybersecurity, sophisticated back-office SaaS, health tech, and smart mobility. They know they need help.
Let's run through some concrete examples we found of this international cooperation filling those specific gaps. Maybe start with data security and trusted services. That seems like an area where maybe Japanese branding isn't perceived as strongly as some other highly digitized nations.
Yeah, we see clear examples of partnerships leveraging strong foreign digital branding and established trust frameworks. For secure data access, for example, there's a Japanese-Estonian startup called Planetway that's been instrumental. They deployed their secure data platform called PlanetCross for Nishigas, which is a major Japanese gas company. This platform allows for secure, decentralized data connection between different databases, a really vital step for companies trying to move away from those old, monolithic legacy systems. And the Estonian connection is key there because Estonia has built this global reputation for robust, secure, trusted e-governance. Japan is essentially borrowing that trust.
We also saw the government itself taking this approach for its own public sector digital needs, basically acquiring the know-how instead of trying to build it all from scratch internally.
Exactly. For e-government expertise in IT systems, NEC, which is a huge Japanese tech company, actually acquired Denmark's KMD Holding back in 2018. This is a very direct, strategic move. They were explicitly leveraging Denmark's reputation as a world leader in public sector digital services. Denmark was ranked #1 in the UN e-government survey around that time. NEC needed to import that successful operational expertise, that implementation know-how, into their own public sector projects in Japan. They bought the experience.
Okay, moving into specific industries needing disruption, what about critical high-tech areas like healthcare and automotive?
Yeah, in health tech, you can see clear necessity driving adoption of foreign solutions. Koala Life, which is a Swedish company making smart cardiac monitoring devices, successfully set up a partnership with Asahi Kasei, a major Japanese corporation. This highlights the need for specialized cutting-edge hardware combined with the sophisticated analytics software that goes with it, things that are just hard to generate quickly and effectively purely internally. And in the automotive sector, mobility, Toyota's advanced tech division, Woven Planet, has been heavily reliant on external acquisitions and partnerships. They bought the US-based operating systems provider Renovo. They've partnered with experts like Portugal's Vinium for intelligent networking software for connected cars. They've worked with France's EasyMile for self-driving technology. Even Toyota recognizes it needs to bring in specialized expertise from outside.
So the need to import these solutions is clearly undeniable. But it can't be that easy for foreign companies just to walk in and sell, right?
Yeah.
What are the hurdles?
Oh, absolutely not easy. While the market opportunity is huge, the barriers to entry are still significant. They reflect all that deep cultural and structural resistance we've been talking about. Foreign firms have to deal with those incredibly complex, often undocumented, old legacy IT systems. Integrating with those is a nightmare. Then you have the significant cultural and language barriers, which are always a factor in Japan. Highly specific local regulations you need to navigate. And maybe, most importantly, success really demands patience and quite a bit of upfront investment, because building that truly trustful relationship, which is an absolute prerequisite for doing serious business there, it just takes time in Japan. You have to put in the face time.
And it sounds like even where your company comes from, its sort of perceived digital brand can play a role in getting your foot in the door and building that initial trust.
It definitely seems to. The sources suggest that firms coming from countries with maybe weaker digital branding or less internationally recognized tech leadership, they might face a harder time attracting initial interest. Establishing that crucial first layer of trust can be more difficult compared to competitors who benefit from the globally recognized, maybe safer-seeming label of being, say, US-based. The reputation of the company's home country can almost act as a kind of risk mitigator in the eyes of those cautious, risk-averse Japanese corporate decision-makers. So if we try to synthesize this whole deep dive, what we've really explored is a society operating under this fundamental defining contradiction. You have the visible, high-quality success that Japan presents to the world. You know, the perfect service, the reliable trains, the affordability for tourists. But that success is sustained by an internal system. The labor culture emphasizing harmony over voice, the corporate structure prioritizing stability, the political system seeking consensus that is structurally resistant to the very nature of high-speed, disruptive digital change. That cultural imperative for silent harmony, it perfected the known. It optimized the efficiency of the service economy we see today. But at the same time, the corporate culture's deep fear of risk, combined with the lack of a powerful domestic startup engine, is actively hindering the nation's necessary adaptation for the future. And the result, as we've seen, when a nation increasingly forced to look externally, to import the digital intelligence and the speed that it seems unable, or perhaps unwilling, to generate quickly enough internally.
And the ultimate question, the one hanging over everything we've discussed, is about Japan's long-term economic and social viability. It really seems to hinge on whether that deep-seated cultural preference for silent harmony, the very quality that perfected their past achievements, can finally reconcile itself with the necessary chaos, the friction, and the inherent risk that defines participation in the global digital disruption that's already well underway.